How's everybody this morning? I want to say, Gus and Karen, I want to just tell you, if Allie was here, I would let her know that just love having her play for us. And this morning I heard her singing, and it was like, she can sing. It's really good to have her. We appreciate her. This morning, things are a little bit different in that for me, um, Deb has been gone for a week, which, yeah, okay, I can make it a week. But not being here on Sunday when I'm here kind of, and I'm used to her being here, kind of throws me a bit. I'm scrambling to fill some holes that she usually takes care of. And then Larry is not here this morning. And so I was trying to remember to make sure that we had coffee and a couple things. I mean, Larry does a whole lot that we're not aware of. And there's no way I could keep up with that. But just trying to get the obvious things covered. Uh, and then was walking up this morning, coming in early, and there's a gentleman who was sitting out on our bench. He was from Walla Walla, and he was over here. He'd come over for the weekend, but then he decided to, kind of at the last minute, maybe I should get back because he's on parole, and he didn't want to violate not being there tomorrow. And we had this interesting conversation. I invited him in, and I got him a cup of coffee and let him use the phone to call somebody for a ride or what have you. But I had to wonder later. I showed him compassion, and I think I showed him grace. But I have to wonder if I really showed him love. I wonder if I really showed him God's love. I was, like I say, I was kind of distracted with the things that I had on my plate this morning and kind of trying to cover some bases that normally are taken care of. And I showed him compassion, but did I really, if I think about the way that Jesus would have greeted him and perhaps sat down with him, I think I came up on the short end this morning. I'm just being real. I like to be real with you. I had a friend one time that was listening to an audio tape of mine, and they said, you know what I like about listening to you speak? I said, what's that? And they said, you don't have a preacher's voice. I said, what's a preacher's voice? They're from the Midwest, and evidently people in the Midwest use a preacher's voice. You may have seen it on TV, I think, if I have it right, as Jesus was here today. And I said, no, I don't have a preacher's voice. I'm me. I'm me because God called me. I said before, and I don't mean to, I'm not trying to be falsely humble. I'm trying to be real and transparent with you. I say that many times, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I don't make a claim to be the guy with the only truth and the only, thing you should walk out with. I'm called. I know that God called me to this. I know that He put His mark on me and He set me aside and He said, I want you to preach the word. And I don't do it like Charles Swindoll, right? I'm not Charles Swindoll, I'm Tim. Charles Swindoll can't do things I can do. I'm just saying. We're all called to be who we are. Yes? God called every one of us to be who we are, and He called us to be authentic and to be genuine and to be real and to be transparent. One of the very first Sundays, Gus, you weren't here, but one of the very first Sundays, I said to this group of people and some of the others that were here, we have to be authentic and transparent if we're going to make an impact in people's lives. Because I can remember when I was a kid, and I believe that people loved the Lord, so I'm not saying they didn't, but it was much more of this cultural thing where people came and they put on their best face. How do you help people when you're putting on your best face? Because they can't identify with that. It looks like hypocrisy. So we have to be real. This morning I had an opportunity to love somebody like Jesus. I'm not convinced that I did a great job. Yeah, I gave him a cup of cold water, a hot coffee for that matter. And yeah, I let him use the telephone. And yeah, I listened to his story a little bit and commiserated with him. But I'm not convinced that I loved him like Jesus. That's what I'm called to do. God graces us. God graces us so that we can grace others. Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth of the gospel? If that's all I said this morning, you could walk away with something good this morning, yes? I'll try not to mess it up by keep talking. Father God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for your plans. Thank you for your purpose in our life. Thank you that you don't give up on us. And at the same time, Lord, there are people around us that, like Cody this morning, you haven't given up on him, and you brought him into my presence this morning in order to minister to him, Lord. And in whatever way I let you down, I ask you forgive me. And in whatever way I came through for you, thank you for helping me to do that. Lord, help me to trust you for what happens at this church. Whatever our future looks like as a church, I want to trust you. But I recognize, Lord, that in order for things to work out the way you want them to, that I and the people who are here, we need to walk with you in obedience. We need to apply this word to our life, and we need to walk in faith. Help us to do that, Lord, I pray. There's an old story about Sven and Ollie. Sven and Ollie were out, and they were digging holes. It's their job, and Sven would dig a hole, and then, well, Ollie was walking behind him, and he was filling in the holes. As he would dig the hole, fill in the hole, dig the hole, fill in the hole. And somebody saw them doing this, and so they stepped up to him when he took a little break, and they said, I noticed that one of you digs holes and the other fills it in. What are you guys doing? What do you accomplish? And they said, well, there's usually three of us. Henry is usually here, and I dig the holes, and Henry puts in the post hole, and then Ollie fills in the hole, but Henry wasn't here this morning. They knew their role, didn't they? They knew their purpose. Sven was a hole digger. That was his purpose, and he was going to dig a hole whether anybody else was around or not. And Ollie was a hole filler. So he was going to fill the holes because that was his purpose. If only we could find our purpose. If only we could find our purpose, yes? And what if we were to find our purpose and we were to go about our purpose as if it didn't matter if anybody else was doing theirs or not? What if we did that? What if we did that? That I so latch on to my purpose that whether Henry shows up or not, I'm doing my purpose. What if we as a church found our purpose and we accomplished it, regardless of who shows up? I really don't like to acknowledge, from time to time that it seems like some mornings were slim. And I thought like sometimes church is like a box of chocolates. We never know what we're going to find when we show up. Yeah, just that way. I don't know what's going on. God does. Yes? He does. He knows. And so whether anybody else is doing what they're supposed to be doing, I don't even know how I paint that, but whatever, I want to fulfill my purpose. Like Sven. I'm going to dig the hole. I could quit right now, but God does have a message. I want to share this with you. We all need purpose. And without it, people shrivel. Without purpose, people shrivel. My cousin Rick, he had an IQ, I think, of about 150. It seems like I heard something. He was extremely intelligent. And he was all cranial. He was all about, academic and thinking through things and logic and all that kind of. He was light years ahead of me. Rick had been offered a full ride scholarship to Annapolis by the Navy to be an officer. Full ride. Not just admitted him, but gave him a full ride scholarship to Annapolis. He turned him down. Because Rick was lost and Rick didn't know what to do with his life. Rick ended up, short story, Rick ended up going to Vietnam as a machine gunner in a helicopter. He had lots of options, but Rick had no idea what he wanted to do with his life. And so he seemed to pick those things that were completely at odds with what God would have him do. He got out of the service, didn't know what to do with himself. He became a mail carrier. Now, I don't mean to disparage mail carriers. I'm glad we have one, and I'm glad he does his job well. But I'm telling you, for a guy who's got an IQ of 150, who could have been a brain surgeon, who could have been anything in the world, he decided to walk down the streets and put mail in because he felt he had no purpose. That was Rick. Felt he had no purpose. God, I don't even get it. And he grew up in a church. He grew up with a family who loved, this is our family, loved the Lord. But Rick was just lost. And at 30 years old, Rick made up a cocktail of cyanide and drank it and ended his life. That's what happens when people have no purpose. I've known more than one person who has given up on their life and ended their life because he couldn't find any purpose. On the flip side, Louis Talbot was the founder of Biola College down in Long Beach, California. Talbot Theological Seminary sprang out of that to honor him, but he began Talbot College, Biola College. And Louis wrote this book, or his wife wrote this book, For This I Was Born. Louis, he learned early on what his purpose was. He pursued that purpose with all of his life's energy, the entire length of his life. So how can we know? How can we know what our purpose is? If it's that crucial that we either shrivel without it or we succeed beyond our wildest dreams with it, how can we know? Well, there's no shortage of books on the market. You know that. Go to a Barnes & Noble, look online at Amazon, or walk into a Christian book supply and you'll find lots of books on purpose. In 2002, the New York Times number one best-selling book was a little thing called The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. Pastor in Southern California who wrote this book, just came from his heart, and he wrote this book, and it hit the top of the sales list. Changed people's lives. It's been printed into more than 32 million copies in 85 languages. You might be somewhat taken back by the first sentence in the book. You know what it says? Karen does. She's looking at me. She's smiling. It says, it's not about you. Your purpose is not about you. What? What do you mean it's not about me? It's all about me. No, it's not about you. But God, you got this great stuff for me. Yeah, I do. But it's not about you. Well, if it's not about me, then what's it about? It's about Him. Your purpose and my purpose is about Him. Rick writes, if you want to know why you were placed on this planet, you must begin with God. Because you were born by His purpose and for His purpose. So, how do we find His purpose? Does He give us any clues? You know He does. Last week we dropped in on Joseph, and Joseph was number 11 in 12 sons. There were daughters too, but they didn't talk about them back then. But there was 11 sons. At 12 sons, he was number 11, but he was number 1 in his father's eyes. We saw him being sold off to slave traders last week. The sons were not very happy with him. He seemed to flaunt his favored status. I talked about a coat that was a long coat with sleeves. Somebody pointed out to me, well, Pastor, my Bible said that it was a colorful robe. And the reason I bring that up is because last week I said, well, the Bible doesn't say it was colorful. Well, actually, Tim made sort of a sweeping statement. I had to go back and look, and I looked at the Hebrew this week, and because I studied Hebrew when I was a kid. No, I didn't. They're tools. So I go back and I look at the Hebrew, and what the Hebrew says is the word that they use for the coat could be interpreted, as the RSV interprets it, as a long coat with sleeves. What I meant by long coat, they were being very specific, that the robe went down to the soles of his feet, and that the sleeves went down to the palm of his hand. They can be interpreted that way, but it also mean colorful. It could be extravagant, and it's up to the interpreter to decide which of those words to use. So in my RSV, it says a long coat with sleeves, and in the NIV, it says colorful, and so we're all right this morning. So we're all correct. I say that because I want you to know that if you spot something that I say, I'm not going to be offended, and I'm not going to get all defensive if you come to me later and say, but Pastor, I thought, it's okay, let's talk. Because we're here to discover, right? I mean, I'm pretty much always right. At least I'm pretty sure I am. But so we dropped in on him, and these brothers are not happy with him for this, for his flaunting his position. And they sell him off to some slave traders, and he gets taken to Egypt. In Egypt, he's purchased by the captain of the guard, and he oversees the kind of secret service of Pharaoh. And in his house, it says that Potiphar's wife, who's the man who purchased him, Potiphar's wife became attracted to Joseph, and she made overtures toward him. And he spurned her. And he scorned her, and when he did, she didn't take it very well. And so she made up a story about how he had tried to attack her. And Potiphar had him thrown in prison. Not very good. I can't even imagine what the prison was like in those days. I've been to prison. I have to be careful how I say that. I've been in a prison. Haven't been to prison. I'd tell you if I was, but I hadn't been. In fact, you ever see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or heard about that? I was in that prison. It's in Salem. And I was down, they took us down as a class from Warner. We went in there, and I went down to what they call the hole. But even so, Moses tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. We talked about last week. What do we believe? We believe that God is with us. Joseph believed that God was with him in that prison. Let me ask you, if we were to step into that prison, if we were able to somehow step into that prison and visit Joseph for a moment, if we were to ask him, I think he would probably say, God is with me. But let's ask him a different question. Joseph, what's your purpose? Do you think he would have a clue? This young man who was his father's favorite, who was sold by his 10 older brothers, who had done the right thing in this house of Potiphar, and yet he was thrown in jail for it. Joseph can't look ahead. He doesn't know what's coming. He doesn't know the end of the story. All he knows is where he's at. Can you imagine what it was like for him? And to ask him, Joseph, what's your purpose? I don't think he would have a clue. See, discovering your purpose is a process. Discovering your purpose is a process. And I'm going to share something with you later on that kind of wraps that up, but I want you to know it's a process. Think about all of the biblical people that you can think of that got it right. At what point did they get it right? At what point did they know? Did they just know? Did Joseph just know that God's purpose for him was? Did Moses know what God's purpose? Did Abraham know what God's purpose? No. He told Abraham, go with me, come with me, and leave this place and go to a place that I will show you. And he doesn't discover God's purpose until he's walked with God. Yes? We don't discover our purpose. We can do some intellectual stuff. We can do some academic, theological stuff and say this is our purpose. But we can't truly make God's purpose for our life our purpose until we walk with God. And it becomes real in our life. Sadly, my cousin Rick did not walk with God long enough to discover God had a purpose for his life. God had a purpose for Rick. Breaks my heart. He shares my brother's birthday. They're born on the same day, same year. They're the same age. Rick could have been, who knows, limitless potential. Secondly, discovering your purpose means serving people. Means serving people. Joseph was in that prison. I'd love to read the scripture for you, but I'm afraid it'd take 30 minutes just to read through it. So allow me to kind of summarize, and I invite you this week to sit down and read through Genesis, these stories of Joseph. I invite you to do that. But Joseph is in this prison, and it says that they put the Pharaoh was not very happy with the baker and the butler. And he sent them to prison, and the chief jailer said, I want you to look after these two guys and take care of them. And Joseph did. With integrity, with credibility, and with compassion, and with grace, he looked after these guys. He who had been sold by his brothers takes care of these men. And they came to him, and they must have seen something in him, could be able to tell that this man was this man of integrity. And so they come to him and they say, we had this dream. And Joseph kind of noticed. So, Joseph kind of opened that up because he said, you guys don't look like yourselves this morning. What's going on? We had this dream. And so the butler tells a dream and the baker tells a dream. And so Joseph says, well, dreams are, God interprets dreams. So tell me your dream, let me tell you. And so they do. And so then Joseph says, well, to the butler, he said that the three bushels means this and the three that. And he interprets the dream and he says, in 3 days, the Pharaoh is going to bring you back. And he's going to reinstate you to your position. Okay? And so the baker says, well, that sounds pretty good. This is my dream. And he tells him his dream and he interprets it and he says, well, it's not so good for you. 3 days, you're going to be called back, but he's going to cut off your head and he's going to put you on a pole and the ravens are going to pick out your brains. Sorry. That's what it says. And so it happens. These guys get called back in 3 days and Joseph says, by the way, he says to the butler, when you get back with Pharaoh, would you remember me? Would you put in a good word for me? So in 3 days, these guys go back and the Pharaoh holds a big feast. And he restores the butler, and the butler becomes once again the cupbearer to Pharaoh. But he forgot about Joseph. And the baker, his life was ended. There was nothing he could say. And then Moses tells us there's 2 more years that Joseph waited. Did Joseph know what his purpose is? I dare say no. He has no idea. 2 years, Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh has this dream about, the fat cows and the skinny cows and all of that. And so he tells his advisors, and nobody can interpret the dream. And then the cupbearer says, wait a minute. I was in jail. Remember when you put me in jail because you're not very happy with me? I went to jail, and this guy named Joseph, he heard my dream, and he told me the dream, and it came, and exactly what he said came true. You restored me to your service, and you had the baker just like he said. Joseph could interpret your dreams. He says, bring him in. So they bring in Joseph, and Joseph says, what can I do for you, sir? He says, I had a dream, and Joseph says, the Lord will show you your dream. Tell it to me. And he says, I dreamed that seven fat cows came out of the water, followed by 7 skinny cows. And the 7 fat cows ate up the 7 skinny cows. And then something else happened. I can't remember. It seemed like there was fat stalks of grain and skinny stalks of grain, 7 of them. Anyway, and he says, this is what this means. This is what it means. That Egypt is going to experience 7 years of famine. Tell it right. 7 years of plenty, right? 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, which is going to eat up everything that we had during the 7 years of plenty. So while you're doing well, I would suggest that you build storehouses and you take a portion of that grain and you put it away, and so that when the years of famine come along, there will be plenty left. And then you can get through those years of famine. And so Pharaoh says, that's a great idea. And who better to put those things into plan but you? And then he made Joseph the prime minister of Egypt, gave him his signet ring, took it off and gave it to him. And made him, he says, only the Pharaoh will be greater than you. But in everything else, men will answer to you. Haven't ruined the story too bad yet, have I? So he does that, and he puts him in charge. And 7 years of plenty begin. And they begin to store grain up. So much so that it says that Joseph stopped keeping count because there was so much. There was so much plenty that he stopped keeping count. And then the years of famine began. If we were to drop in on Joseph at this point and ask Joseph, and we were to say, Joseph, what's your purpose? What do you think he would say? Maybe he would say, well, my purpose is to interpret dreams, because after all, God gave me this ability to interpret dreams. And we would say, no, that's not really your purpose. That's just the skill and the gift God gave you in order to realize his purpose, yes? Right? It's just God's way of allowing you to fulfill your purpose. What has God put in your hand? Because it's important that we recognize what our skills and our abilities and our gifts and our talents are. They're not our purpose, but they are tools to be used for God's purpose. Follow? God gives us these abilities. He's given me the ability to speak, even though I stumble from time to time. He's given me this ability to share my heart with you. And so that's a way of fulfilling his purpose, but it's not his purpose. He might say, well, it's to save Egypt. My purpose is to save Egypt, but that's not true either. It wasn't to save Egypt, but it's to further the story till he gets to the point of fulfilling his purpose. Think about Saul. Think about Saul. Was he serving God's purpose when he was killing Christians? No. Did he think that was his purpose? Yes. So this is my purpose. I am going to protect the name of Israel. I'm going to protect the Jewish faith. And he began slaughtering Christians, but that was not his purpose. Fast forward. His brothers, his family are starving up in Canaan because of the famine. And there's no bread to be found in Egypt and nowhere in the entire Holy Land. And they begin to starve, and so Jacob sends the boys. He says, I need for you to go down to Egypt because I hear they have grain. They're selling grain to people. Take this money, go down and buy some grain and bring it back here. But leave Benjamin, the youngest, here, because if anything happened to him, I'd die. Because Benjamin's his other son by his favorite wife, Rachel. Joseph and Benjamin, his two favorites. So they go to Egypt. And they get an audience with Joseph. And you think, really? Because we're talking about of all of Egypt, and Joseph is in charge of distributing, here's 20 pounds and 20 pounds. We think that sounds crazy. Well, it's not so crazy. Did you know when President Lincoln was elected president, that one of the things he would do, Sounds crazy, but it's the truth. He would sit out on the front porch of the White House with a desk, and people would come to him from all over the country, and they'd say, I'd like to be the postmaster in Kansas City. Yeah. At that time, the president was in charge of hiring all of those staff. And the president would appoint the postmaster from Kansas City. Crazy stuff. So it's not so crazy that Joseph was in charge of distributing all of this grain. And the brothers come up, and it says that he recognized them. They had no idea it was Joseph. It's been 13 years. 13 years since they last saw him. He was 17, now he's 30. He looks completely different. Besides that, I'm sure he's got, he looks like an Egyptian. He's, walked like an Egyptian. He looks completely different. They don't recognize him. And so they're looking to make a trade. I'm going to try to shorten this up because I know this could take a really long time. So the really thing is he sends them back and forth, and he's testing them. Are they really for real? He sends them back to Canaan, they come back. Sends back Canaan, they come back. And finally, they come back with their little brother, Benjamin. He says, "Gus, I'm not going to let you go until you bring Benjamin." So they bring Benjamin, and they are there. And they're scared. He's second in line to Pharaoh. They're scared that he's going to have them killed because Joseph makes it kind of look like they're trying to steal, and they're trying to cheat him, and they come in, and Joseph is sitting there. And there's these 10 older brothers who sold him, and they've been humbled. And there's this younger brother, Benjamin. The last time he's seen him, Benjamin was 4 years old. And he's overcome with emotion. And he sends his staff, he sends them out of the room. He says, "Leave these men alone with me." And he finally breaks down and he tells his brothers, he says, "It's me, Joseph, your brother." And they're like, "What?" They can't even comprehend. They're like, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I'm your brother, Joseph. The one you sold. The one you wanted to kill, but you sold into slavery 13 years ago. It's me." And they're like, This is impossible. It can't be you. And he says, "No, it's me. Come see. Come look closer." And they came to him. And they were filled with fear. Because if anybody ever had a reason to get revenge, it was him. And if there was anybody who had the power and the leverage and the authority to take revenge, it was him. A word off with their heads. And they know it. And they're scared to death. And how does he respond? In Genesis 45, verse 7, Joseph is speaking to his brothers. And he says, "God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors." Verse 8, "So it was not you who sent me here, but God." It's my purpose. My purpose. Joseph is seen as a forerunner of Jesus Christ in the Scriptures. It was Joseph's purpose to provide salvation to his people. Without Jacob's 12 sons, there would have been no line to Jesus Christ. Through a famine orchestrated by God, they all could have been wiped out. But he sent Joseph for this very purpose, to save the line, to save the remnant, to save the nation of Israel. That was his purpose. And your purpose and my purpose is no different. It's no different. We have lots of things that we can accomplish. We have lots of roles to play. We have different things that God wants us to do. In the body there are many parts, and some say I'm of a hand, and some say I'm an eye, or some say I'm a foot, or I'm an ear. But we all serve the same purpose. See, it wasn't about Joseph, but about God's purpose through Joseph. And you and I, we have a purpose. We've been given this purpose to be what? Salt and light. To be salt and to be light. We have the same purpose that Joseph had. We have the same purpose that Abraham had. We have the same purpose that David had and Isaiah had. We have the same purpose as that Saul had and Peter had. And that's to tell people about this God who loves them and to lead them in some way closer, draw them closer to God so that they can experience salvation. That's our purpose. So what if because I like to do this because I think it's good for us to envision, what if every believer in the world, there are hundreds of millions of believers in the world, what if every believer was to embrace God's purpose for that life, which is to draw other people to God. Draw them to His heart. Let God convict them, but draw them to His heart. Love people with the love of Jesus and draw them to His heart. What if every believer in the world did that? Say, damn, that's a great dream, but it's not going to happen. What if half? Let's play a little Abraham here. Okay, God, but what if only 10 recognize? Okay, so what if only half? That'd be great. But probably. What if a quarter? What if 1/10 of the Christians in this world were to say, I'm going to embrace God's purpose for my life, and I'm going to begin to do all that I can to draw people to God by showing them His love, by showing compassion, by showing grace. 1/10, that's pretty big. What if we did? What if we did? What if just us? And I don't mean like nobody else would. That's not my point. My point, but just what if we did? What if Henry doesn't show up to put the posts in? So what? What if we dig the holes anyway? What if we just dig the holes anyway? Let's trust God to do what He wants to do among His people, and let's just do ours. Let's just fulfill our purpose, regardless of what the rest of the world's doing. Because right now, turn on the news. No, don't turn on the news. It's crazy out there. How do we turn this back? We must be responsible for what we can do. Let's dig the hole. Does that sound good? Let me just dig the hole. We'll just tell people that God loves them. And let's let God work it out. I want so badly, Father, to accomplish your purpose in my life. And Father, you know, you have been there when I have knelt down in my room and I have felt lost. I feel like I'm failing and I don't feel like I'm getting done what you want me to do, and I just feel lost, and sometimes it feels like having no purpose. But Father, nothing could be further from the truth. You have planned out every day of my life before me. And that's true of everyone in this room. That's true of everyone who ever hears this message. That's true of every believer, of every person. You love us. And you have given us a purpose. And that purpose is to be salt and to be light. Help us to be that. We get discouraged when we fail. We get discouraged when we're afraid. We get discouraged when we don't know the right words to say. We get discouraged when we blow it. But you've called us So, Father, for me today, I just ask that you would help me to go on doing what you've called me to do, regardless of who shows up and who doesn't, of who does the work and who doesn't. Help me to do my part. Help me to dig the hole. And Father, for this group of people that are here this morning, thank you for them, because you love them so much, and you gave me the honor and the privilege of loving them. So, Lord, I ask you to help me to love them well. They deserve that. They have shown me such grace and such love. Help me to show it back to them in a way that builds them up, encourages them, and says to them 1,000 times, God loves you. Help me to do that. Be with my wife this week and help her to come home. I need her. And thank you for your work among us. Open our eyes, open our spiritual eyes, Lord, so that as Elisha, we could see you at work in the world around us. In the name of your Son, Jesus, I pray. Amen.